I still remember the moment everything changed, not because of alarms blaring or systems failing, but because my world shifted in silence. A quiet that feels louder than any explosion, because it's the silence of realization. My name is Captain Sarah Walker, and I spent a lifetime preparing for uncertainty, every simulation, every flight drill, every emergency checklist. But nothing, not a single exercise, prepared me for the moment. My commander slumped over in the cockpit and left a plane full of lives entirely in my hands. We were cruising at 36,000 feet, engines steady, the hum of airflow familiar, routine. Passengers were relaxed, crew members were in their zones, and I, the backup pilot, was seated to the side, scanning flight data and mentally reviewing approach vectors for later in the flight. I had heard others say quietly, "She's backup, she's still learning," as if my competence was tied exclusively to a label and nothing else. There was always an undercurrent of doubt, not open hostility, but subtle, like a breeze you notice only because it stirs your hair, a whisper that something had to be proven. But no whisper mattered more than the moment my commander said, with a tone meant to reassure, "Don't touch anything unless I tell you." And seconds later he leaned forward, his face slack, unconscious, and then very savagely everything became my responsibility. The alarms didn't go off immediately. There was no dramatic explosion or flash of light. It began with a slight pause in the rhythm of engine hum, a subtle shift in vibration through the yoke, the kind of thing seasoned pilots feel in their bones before any system picks it up. The horizon outside the cockpit window was calm, blue and uninterrupted, but inside, the aircraft had become a puzzle, with some pieces rearranged by unknown hands. The commander's voice cut through the quiet with that instruction, "Don't touch anything," and I remember feeling the weight of that sentence press against my chest, as if it was a command not just about the cockpit, but about my place in the crew, about my value. And then he slumped. No warning, no build-up, just a sudden collapse of consciousness, like someone had turned off the lights from within. That first second of shock was nothing compared to the 1,000 in the minutes that followed, when I realized the flight crew was looking at me not with expectation, but with uncertainty, as if the label backup was now a wall between capability and leadership. I reached across the narrow aisle, tapping his shoulder, calling his name softly at first, then, with rising firmness, "Commander? Sir, respond." Nothing. His body was limp enough to make me realize this was no minor medical event. It was serious. And the cockpit doors were closed, the co-pilot's seat empty, and the plane was still climbing without human guidance. That realization settled in like a physical weight, a pressure in my lungs that didn't go away. But instinct doesn't wait for permission. Training doesn't pause for hesitation. When responsibility hits, your mind narrows, sharpens, and you decide what matters most. Every person who trusted you with their life. My first action was to assume the controls. I slid into the co-pilot seat as if some invisible force pushed me there, and my hands touched the control yoke with a mixture of familiarity and new terror. You may think that a pilot remains calm in moments like this, but calm isn't the absence of fear. It's a decision to act in spite of it. I took a breath and spoke into the intercom. "This is Captain Walker. Commander is unresponsive. I am taking control." My voice came out steady, but my mind was racing. Check systems, check altitude, check trajectory, stabilize flight. I ran through the mental checklist with precision, not because my heart was calm, but because controlled action dissolves panic. The first thing I noticed was that the instruments were flickering, subtle blips of warning that weren't present a moment earlier. That meant one of two things. Either the electrical system had glitched at the same moment as the commander's collapse, or there was something deeper, an unseen force at work. The cabin behind us was silent, not with fear, but with that tense stillness that comes when people realize they are waiting for a decision. I could feel dozens of eyes on the back of my head, not accusatory, but expectant, and I made a choice in that instant. I would act as though competence was assumed, not questioned, because leadership requires confidence before results. I adjusted our altitude manually, using the yoke and throttle with careful precision, feeling every vibration as if the plane itself was communicating in a language of force and resistance. But with every adjustment, more warnings lit up, indicators I had studied in simulators but never had to interpret under real pressure. Hydraulic pressure fluctuated. Navigation data lagged. We were losing autopilot capability. All signs pointed to a descending reliability of automatic systems. And that's when the voice of doubt tried to enter my mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe you shouldn't have touched anything. But I pushed it aside immediately, because the moment you hesitate in crisis is the moment you succumb to it. I keyed the mic again, not for command approval. That was no longer an option, but for the crew and passengers. This is Captain Walker. We are experiencing multiple system failures. Remain calm. Follow instructions if necessary. That sentence wasn't to reassure them as much as it was to anchor me, to cement the idea that I was in command, present and deliberate. The aircraft continued its slow descent, not a free fall, but a glide guided by instinct and calculation. I searched the skies below for a potential landing zone, a patch of earth that offered the smallest chance of safe touchdown. Mountains, forests, rivers, all jostling together like a puzzle with missing pieces. The plane's descent was unsteady now, warning tones layering over each other like sirens in a chorus of alarm. It would be easy to describe that moment as terrifying, but that word isn't strong enough. It was a blend of pressure so intense it felt like a physical force, pressing against every inch of my being. And yet, in that pressure, I found focus. Behind me, I heard murmured conversations, not chaotic, but questioning, as though the crew sought assurance more than hope. I didn't turn back, because leadership often requires forward vision in the absence of direction. Instead, I calculated our glide ratio, adjusted the angle of descent, and steered toward a clearing that bore the closest resemblance to a runway. Flat, open, long enough, but surrounded by trees and uneven terrain. Every pilot knows that landing under such conditions is not just skill, it's negotiation with physics itself. You give ground, you take wind, you read every vibration, every slight shift in pressure. I began preparing for impact, calling out brace positions for landing, non-standard approach initiated. That phrase hung in the air like a line drawn between certainty and consequence. The ground approached with terrifying speed, the horizon morphing into detail, patches of grass, dirt paths, shaded clearings, all indicators of proximity now. I checked the descent rate, airspeed, and steered with every ounce of concentration I could marshal. My heart wasn't racing. That's a misconception about fear. My heart was steady, locked in rhythm with each decision point, each choice of angle, each degree of adjustment. And then we touched down, not with grace, but with controlled force, metal grinding against soil, dust and debris erupting as our wheels made contact. The airplane shuddered, rocked, and then slowed. Slow, meaning alive. Alive in body, mind, and purpose, because landing under those conditions was survival, not perfection. When the plane finally came to a stop, a silence greater than any alarm filled the cabin, not of fear, but of realization. We had landed, alive. And that silence is something you only feel when every possibility has been accounted for and action succeeded against doubt. I turned in my seat and looked at the faces behind me, not shocked, not relieved, but profoundly present. People who understood that survival in a moment like that is not a right, but a result of deliberate choice under pressure. Eventually, assistance came, not immediately but enough to bring support and find out what went wrong. It turned out the commander had suffered a sudden medical event, something undetected, unforeseen, and unrelated to our systems. But in the immediate moments of crisis, there was no distinction between mechanical failure and human failure. Only the reality that decision had to be made. People tried to characterize that landing as lucky, as a fluke, as something improbable. But I know better. There is no magic in survival. There is only choices made under pressure, cool heads when everything collapses, and an acceptance that sometimes the person labeled second is ready to rise when everything before them falls away. So if you, the one watching this story, ever find yourself doubted, underestimated, labeled as just the backup, remember this: labels don't define capability. Fear doesn't define outcome. And leadership isn't about authority given, it's about action taken when it matters most. If you've ever defied expectation, if you've ever risen above what others thought you could do, share your experience with Jach rising above the call. Because stories like these remind us that capability is revealed in moments of truth, not titles.